I believe the move to redefine sex as purely biological rather than legal would reduce rather than enhance current protections and create incoherence in the legislation. Paradoxically, perhaps even deliberately, it would mandate exclusion and discrimination against all trans people, whilst worsening protections for women and girls, would effectively practically disapply the important parts of the Gender Recognition Act and be in breach of our international human rights organisation obligations. It would take away rights which have been enjoyed by the small minority of our population who are trans for almost 20 years, and there are 7,000 people who have a gender recognition certificate. That's who we're afraid of in all of this. A change to the Equality Act's definition of sex to biological sex would have a huge effect on all trans people by effectively mandating their exclusion from public spaces unless they use facilities in their so-called birth gender, which would be humiliating and damaging for them. And it would lead to the policing of women's spaces, which would problematise non-gender conforming women and girls who are not trans. And that is happening now with all the hostility. Indeed, the hysterical media coverage which has accompanied this deliberately provoked war on woke has already led to increased policing in public toilets and harassment of non-gender conforming women by those questioning their rights to be there. Now, I've spent my whole political life and my entire time in Parliament working to create greater equality for all and to reduce bigotry and prejudice. And always have been a committed feminist. The safety of women and the opening up of economic opportunities to them on an equal basis to that of men has always been one of my priorities in politics. I'm also a lesbian. I was only the second out lesbian ever to sit in this place, and the first ever out lesbian government minister, and so I have had some experience of bigotry, prejudice, misogyny and homophobia, and I recognise a politically induced moral panic when I see one. I also recognise a discredited government unleashing a culture war for its own divisive ends when I see it. Those seeking to weaponise anti-trans fear for their own purposes have other issues in their sights too. Principally, these are inclusive sex education and women's abortion rights, as we have seen in the USA, where over 400 anti-LGBTQ+ pieces of legislation have been introduced in state legislatures already this year. The attack on trans people's rights to exist and live with respect and dignity in an accepting society is designed as a wedge issue which will open up the others. It's a gateway to wider homophobia, as the steady rise in hostility to LGBTQ+ people in the street attests to. In fact, I was around when it happened before in the 1980s with the enactment of Section 28, which sought successfully to scapegoat LGBT+ young people and drive them into hiding. It caused untold misery for narrow political ends, wrecking the lives of LGBT+ people for generations, and we should not be contemplating doing it again. The Act is an all-encompassing piece of legislation. It was enacted to advance, consolidate, update the protections of equality law, and it's working very well. But it works by making a blanket presumption against discrimination and against exclusion. It specifies some circumstances in which discrimination is lawful so long as the action taken is a proportionate means of achieving a legitimate aim. That is a very pragmatic way of deciding on a complex range of issues in each case. If we change the definition, it would upend the Act and mandate exclusion for trans people, which I think is inhumane and unacceptable.